Hi, I'm Dr. Mike Varshavsky, a board-certified family medicine doctor. Welcome to my new series, Truth or Scare, where I dive into the latest research and give you my take on the scariest, most disturbing viral health claims making news online. This episode's claim that some pants from athleisure brands, including Lululemon, are made from synthetic fabrics that are treated with toxic chemicals. These chemicals are linked to serious health problems because when you work out, they leach into your sweat and then become absorbed into your bloodstream through your skin. A few different kinds of chemicals are discussed in this specific scenario, but I'm going to focus on the one type that's gotten the most attention: PFAS. Per and polyfluoroalkyl substances are a large family of synthetic chemicals that have become increasingly controversial since their inception. And surprisingly, some of these claims do have truth to them. So let's dive in.
There are forever chemicals in the crotch region of Lululemon leggings. These are PFAS, perfluoroalkyl compounds. These chemicals are associated with hormone disruption, with cancers, with thyroid, kidney, and liver damage in humans.
First, it's true that PFAS are bad for us. They've been around since the 1950s, and PFAS manufacturers have known they're toxic since like the 60s. There's decent evidence linking them to all sorts of health issues, including multiple types of cancer, infertility, severe COVID infections, and developmental delays in children. What makes PFAS especially problematic is that their structure is not easy to break down, both in our bodies and the environment, which is why they've gotten the nickname forever chemicals. There's even evidence of PFAS crossing and injuring the blood-brain barrier, which could allow for other chemicals to start causing neurologic havoc as well. Second, it's also true that PFAS has been detected in workout clothing. The most heavily cited evidence is in a 2022 report from Mamavation, a consumer watchdog blog that publishes eco-wellness product investigations for moms. Look, this isn't the most credible source around, but studies from other sources have shown similar results. Mamavation used an unnamed third-party EPA-certified lab to test PFAS levels in 32 pairs of workout and yoga pants from brands like LuLaRoe, Athleta, and of course Lululemon. The investigation actually included 2 different styles of Lululemon pants, and PFAS were detected in one pair, but not the other. But certain aspects of this entire claim need context. Workout clothing isn't particularly special here. PFAS have been widely used in many consumer products for decades because they're so effective at making materials resistant to water and stains. They make rain jackets waterproof and prevent grease from leaking through in takeout containers. They're in contact lenses, lots of mascara and nail polish, food packaging, carpeting, iPhone screens, and so much more. It's reasonable to say we all own PFAS-treated products. But even if you manage to somehow escape these products, you're still being exposed to PFAS. That's because the chemicals wind up in raindrops, tap water, soil, and food because they're released into the environment during the manufacturing process. And also when this PFAS stuff ends up in landfills or goes through the laundry. So because of usage in products for decades, PFAS are basically everywhere now. And because they don't degrade for years, like we said earlier, they're going to be around with us for a while. Second, it's certainly possible that PFAS do leach out into sweat, but there's no actual direct evidence yet to show this. One study found that a different type of chemical in plastics leaches out, and based on those findings, some experts say it might be reasonable to infer that PFAS could do the same thing. PFAS exposure is a well-known risk factor for multiple diseases, but what we don't know is what level of PFAS exposure is required for those health risks. And as I've said before, it's the dose that makes the poison. And we just don't have enough information about the level of PFAS exposure that creates the actual health issue. In fact, a lot of what we know about the dangers of PFAS comes from animal studies and in much higher doses than we're usually exposed to. The strongest evidence in humans that PFAS exposure has adverse health effects pertains to very high PFAS exposure. For example, people developed various serious medical problems, multiple cancers, kidney disease, thyroid disorders, and more after living near a DuPont manufacturing facility that made Teflon and other products with 2 PFAS chemicals known to be especially toxic. Local water ended up being contaminated with industrial waste that contained exceedingly high levels of PFAS.
The safe level for this chemical in human blood would be no more than 1 0.05 parts per billion. At the time, in the late 1990s, the average level of that chemical being found in the general US population's blood was 30 times higher than that.
In Michigan, there may be more than 11,000 locations contaminated with PFAS, and some residents have found their drinking water test as high as 76,000 parts per trillion, when the EPA's health advisory level is 4 parts per trillion. And while those situations need to be evaluated especially seriously and companies need to be held liable, most of us are not going to be exposed to that much PFAS. In fact, most of us get a tiny amount on an ongoing basis. While this may not cause an immediate health hazard, increased exposure over time is not something we should desire. The more PFAS products that are manufactured and sold, the greater the amount of PFAS lingering in the environment, hence entering our bodies. So it is a true legitimate public health concern. The best way to reduce our collective exposure to PFAS is through broad-scale changes. We need to consider reducing the production and selling of PFAS products in the US and honestly, globally. Given that our environment is so interconnected, what happens here usually happens there, and what happens there happens here. This will require stronger regulatory action, as well as more companies voluntarily ditching PFAS throughout the entire supply chain. Fortunately, we're seeing some progress here. Numerous states have passed laws that ban the sale of certain products with PFAS. For example, by 2025, California will ban PFAS in most textiles. Colorado will ban PFAS in furniture. New York will ban most apparel containing PFAS, and Washington State will ban all apparel plus some other products treated with PFAS. National bans would certainly be more effective, but they aren't in the picture right now. The EPA regulates allowable levels of 2 especially toxic PFAS chemicals in drinking water and has actually proposed doing the same for 9 additional ones to be monitored as industry waste products. But there are thousands of other unregulated PFAS chemicals. Most companies have said that they've reduced or eliminated PFAS from their products or have pledged to phase out their usage over the next few years. One early adopter here, Patagonia, which began searching for alternative ways to waterproof jackets and other outdoor apparel like 15 years ago. Another company that more recently jumped on that bandwagon, Lululemon. The company said it was working with vendors to eliminate the use of PFAS in all clothing by the end of last year. In writing this video, we actually reached out to Lululemon, who confirmed they have phased out the use of PFAS in all their durable water repellent products. Of course, with PFAS bans on the horizon in multiple large states, going PFAS-free is as much a business strategy as a philosophical statement for many consumer brands. Finally, the amount of PFAS found in Lululemon pants was not alarmingly high. It might be worrisome to think about the PFAS being in the crotch of your uber-tight spandex pants, but you don't need to freak out if you've been wearing those pants or other workout pants with comparable PFAS levels. We're being exposed to higher levels of PFAS through food and water rather than clothing. In fact, PFAS are detected by testing for a proxy chemical, fluorine. While the leggings contain a detectable amount of fluorine, it was still a very small amount. On its own, this exposure is not likely to have a measurable impact on your health. The problem with PFAS is that they're all over, not that they're just in one specific product. Ultimately, your exposure to PFAS is not fully within your control, and the impact of your own consumer choices is still unclear. When it comes to your health, there are certain things that you can focus on that will be highly likely to bring about benefit or decrease risk. But putting a tremendous amount of focus on PFAS seems a bit premature. But. I will say it's not unreasonable to avoid PFAS exposure by buying products without these chemicals when you can. On a scale of 0 to 10 on my truth or scare scale, this claim gets a 5.5. There's actually legitimate risks to wearing certain other clothes. Click here to check that out, and as always, stay happy and healthy.